another line, another drink, another excuse disguised as a promise. One last time that's never the last. The night watches you, motionless, as you repeat the same ritual as always. That gesture so yours, so learned, so automatic, as if your hands were moving on their own. And you know it. While you do it, part of you is begging for this to be the last fall. But there's another part, quieter, that just wants to feel that instant of relief, that fleeting pause in the inner noise that never stops. Because in the end, you're not looking for pleasure, you're looking for rest. A second of peace, even if borrowed. A breath of forgetfulness that covers the weight you carry inside. You tell yourself you'll stop, that this time will be different. But the cycle awaits you like an old lover who never tires of returning. The mind has memory, and yours learned that relief comes wrapped in poison. It repeats because it works, even though it hurts. It repeats because every act of self-destruction is also a plea for calm. And here's the painful truth. It's not about lack of strength, but about an emotional habit as old as your fears. You've mistaken relief for love, escape for comfort. You've learned to heal yourself with the same hands that hurt you. And you do it with such perfect precision, it's frightening. You promise to change, but you do it with the same voice that leads you to the abyss. It's a vicious circle with the name of refuge. But here's what no one tells you. It doesn't break with guilt or hatred or punishment. It breaks with presence, with tenderness, with the courage to stay in discomfort without running from it. Not with grand, heroic gestures, but with small ways of returning to yourself. Breathing when it burns, moving when you're paralyzed, writing when you don't know what to say, asking for help when everything inside you screams silence. If you stay until the end, I promise you something. You'll understand why you repeat what hurts you and how to stop doing it without becoming your own enemy. Not with force, but with awareness. Not by running from yourself, but by returning to yourself. Because what traps you isn't the act, it's the emptiness it tries to fill. And when you learn to look at that emptiness without fear, the cycle stops. And then comes that moment when you think you've understood everything, that you've finally learned the lesson, that you've mastered the impulse. But it only takes a single thought, a tiny emotional crack, for the old reflex to return. It's subtle, almost imperceptible. First, a feeling in your chest, an uneasiness in the air, a silence that weighs too much. Then, without realizing it, you're there again. In front of the same door, with the same excuse, in the same place. You didn't plan it, you didn't seek it. It just happened. And that's where the real deception begins. The mind doesn't repeat for pleasure. It repeats out of fear of feeling what it's trying to avoid. Every time you run away, you reinforce the idea that you can't bear yourself. We were taught to escape emotions, to hide them under blankets of distraction. But emotions don't disappear. They only transform. Anger turns into exhaustion. Sadness disguises itself as apathy. Fear translates into routine. And in the middle of that emotional labyrinth, the body searches for the one thing it remembers brings relief. The repeated gesture, the familiar behavior, the small familiar poison. It's its way of saying, I can't take it anymore. Yet every time you do it, every time you choose to extinguish the fire instead of walking through it, something inside you dims a little more. The cycle feeds not only on actions, but on thoughts, on the phrases you repeat without questioning. I can't change. I always end up the same. That's just who I am. But that's not identity. It's resignation. You've mistaken habit for essence. And that's one of the cruelest traps. When you convince yourself that your pain is part of who you are, You stop seeking a way out. The emotional habit becomes a mirror, and you begin to see yourself only through your mistakes. Do you know where the real turning point lies? When you understand there's no monster to defeat, only a wound to understand. The repeated behavior isn't your enemy. It's your encrypted message. It's your body saying, "See me, listen to me, attend to me." It's not asking for control, it's asking for understanding. And that's the part no one teaches you. It's not about imposing discipline, but about generating presence. To stop reacting and start observing, because when you truly stop, when you decide not to flee from the impulse but to look it in the eye, something changes. You realize it wasn't as powerful as you thought, that the wave that seemed uncontrollable starts to lose strength if you don't feed it with fear, that the need dissolves when you observe it with curiosity. That's real alchemy, transforming impulse into information. What once was punishment becomes guidance. What once ruled you begins to speak to you. And here comes the deepest part: emotional memory. You don't repeat actions, you repeat sensations. Your body holds memories your mind has long forgotten. Each time something hurts, it seeks a familiar escape, an automatic reaction learned long ago. Maybe when you were a child and couldn't express sadness, you learned to distract yourself. Maybe when you felt alone, you discovered that noise protected you. And you keep doing it without knowing why. You don't repeat the act. You repeat the comfort that once worked. You do it because it was your salvation, even if today it's your prison. That's why, to break the cycle, promises aren't enough. Promising is easy. Re-educating the mind is hard. You have to teach it that it can feel bad and still be safe. That discomfort doesn't kill. That unease isn't a threat. You have to teach it new exits, not with theories, but with physical, real, tangible gestures. Walking when the impulse comes, writing what you can't say, breathing until the tremor calms, talking to someone when the inner voice starts lying to you. They're small rituals, almost invisible, but they're what build the way out. And when you start practicing that, something amazing happens. The impulse doesn't disappear, but it loses authority. The voice that used to drag you down starts sounding distant, like an old echo that no longer convinces you. What used to be a war with yourself becomes a conversation. You learn to accompany yourself, not to demand perfection, to forgive yourself without excusing yourself. Not with weakness, but with tenderness. Because that's what truly heals. Tenderness toward yourself. The ability to look at yourself in the midst of disaster and say, "I'm with you, even in this." To understand that you don't need to punish yourself to change, you need to hold yourself while you learn. Power isn't in resisting the impulse, but in transforming it. Turning it into a reminder that you're still alive, that you can still choose differently. And that's the real breaking point. When you realize you don't need to fight yourself, you need to walk with yourself. There's no salvation outside, only return within. The way out isn't to escape the habit, but to go through discomfort with presence. In the end, the behavior that destroys you isn't your enemy, it's the door. And only when you decide to cross it consciously does the repetition stop. Then you discover that control isn't rigidity, it's connection. And for the first time, you don't run from yourself, you return home. But of course, when you start returning to yourself, something strange happens. Silence appears, and silence is frightening. It's that space where there's no distraction, where excuses dissolve and only you remain, bare before your thoughts. Many can't stand that emptiness. That's why they run back to what they know. Not for pleasure, but for fear of silence. Because silence amplifies everything: memories, wounds, desires you never confessed. But what no one tells you is that silence doesn't come to punish you. It comes to teach you. In that void where you think you're lost is where you finally begin to hear yourself. There you discover that behind every impulse lies an unseen emotion. Behind the cigarette, anxiety. Behind the message, loneliness. Behind the food, fear. Behind the screen, avoidance. Every habit you repeat has an emotional root trying to speak to you in a language you haven't learned to translate. You've silenced it with noise, but the body remembers. It always remembers. And when the body isn't heard, it screams with insomnia, with fatigue, with anxiety, with that feeling of emptiness that nothing fills. They told you that to change you need discipline. But it's not just about discipline. It's about intimacy. Intimacy with yourself. Sitting down to look at what hurts without trying to fix it right away. Understanding why you need that relief, instead of punishing yourself for seeking it. The mind obeys punishment for a while, but it only heals with understanding. That's why changes born from self-hatred never last. Because when guilt is the motivation, the soul defends itself. It doesn't transform. And here's something no one teaches you. Self-care isn't always gentle. Sometimes it's brutal. Sometimes it hurts more than the habit you're trying to quit. Because caring for yourself means seeing yourself without filters, facing the reflection you've avoided your whole life. Not with judgment, but with courage. Understanding that change doesn't feel pretty. It feels real. That sometimes loving your process means staying still when all you want is to run. When you start living from that awareness, you realize that the small actions that once seemed insignificant are what hold you up. Lighting a candle when anxiety hits. Placing your hand on your chest when the impulse arrives. Walking without headphones, just to hear the world breathe. These are small rituals, almost invisible, but they have immense power. They bring you back to the present. And the present is the only place where the cycle can break. The interesting thing is that when the body starts trusting you, the impulse changes form. It no longer appears as an enemy, but as a reminder of something needing attention. You start recognizing the signs. That knot in your stomach before repeating the behavior. That pressure in your chest. That emptiness growing right before the just one more time. Those signs aren't traps, they're invitations. Your body doesn't sabotage you, it warns you. You've ignored it so long you mistook its messages for attacks. And when you finally learn to listen, something frees itself. You realize you don't need to repress yourself to have control. Real control isn't rigidity, it's presence. It's not about yelling at the impulse to go away, but about looking at it and saying, I know why you're here, but today I don't need you. And that phrase, said calmly, carries more power than 1,000 promises made in guilt. Because authentic change doesn't happen when you force yourself. It happens when you recognize yourself. It's not about becoming someone new, but remembering who you were before you needed anesthesia. Before you filled your voids with noise. Before you confused comfort with punishment. And when you reconnect with that version of yourself, the one beneath all the layers, something inside you breathes again. And here comes a truth few can bear. Healing also means losing. Losing the drama that kept you occupied. Losing the character you built. Losing the story that made you feel special for suffering. Pain, though painful, also gives identity. And when you decide to let it go, you're left in the void, not knowing who you are without your wound. But that void isn't the end, it's the beginning. It's the space where you can choose differently, where you stop acting out of habit and start responding with awareness. And that's where freedom starts to make sense, because you no longer need to escape or flee or numb yourself. You no longer seek quick relief because you understand you can endure discomfort without disappearing. You no longer repeat because there's nothing left to hide. What once was addiction becomes presence. What once was punishment becomes learning. And what once took you away from yourself becomes the path that brings you back. And when you reach that point, when you finally feel you can breathe without looking for an immediate exit, something becomes clear. It was always about you, never about the external. Everything you thought saved you was only a way to postpone meeting yourself. You weren't addicted to the act, you were addicted to avoiding yourself. You avoided your thoughts, your memories, your story. You avoided facing yourself because you knew that if you did, everything would change. And change, though it sounds liberating, is also mourning. It hurts to say goodbye to who you were, even if it hurt to be them. You start noticing how society is built precisely to keep you distracted. Screens shouting promises of escape, routines designed to keep you from thinking, notifications that don't let you hear the silence. Everything is made so you never stop, so you keep running without direction, confusing motion with life. But there's a big difference between moving and advancing. You've been moving for years without taking a single step inside yourself. Real progress isn't seen, it's felt. It's not in visible achievements, but in the calm you gain when nothing outside changes. But you no longer need it to. And then you understand. It wasn't willpower you needed, it was emotional intimacy. Learning to hold yourself when temptation whispers in your ear. Understanding that the impulse isn't your enemy, but an old version of you trying to protect you. The version that still believes that without the cigarette, without the screen, without the forbidden message, you won't survive. You don't have to kill it, just hold it and tell it it's no longer necessary, that now you're in charge. And then comes the next level, rewriting. Because stopping repetition doesn't mean stopping feeling. It means giving new meaning to what you feel. It means creating new rituals to replace the old ones, not out of obligation, but out of self-love. If before you sought relief in what hurt you, now you learn to build relief with your own hands, from the everyday. A walk, a conscious breath, an honest conversation, a shower that cleans not only the skin but the mind. Every small gesture becomes a way of saying, I'm here, I don't need to escape. And as you do that, something inside reorganizes. Guilt turns into understanding, anxiety into energy, repetition into observation. You begin to live with a clarity that once scared you, but now feels like freedom. Because you discover that you don't need to shut down emotions to live. You just need to learn to listen to them. Pain isn't a threat, it's a compass. Sadness isn't weakness, it's a doorway. And even the void, the one you feared most, is the space where the new can be born. What once felt like punishment, that discomfort, that impulse, that relapse, becomes part of the process. You no longer see it as an enemy, but as a sign. The body speaks through sensations, not words. And every uncomfortable sensation is a message saying, something inside me needs to be seen. You don't need to run from that voice. You need to learn its language. Because when you do, temptation loses its power to manipulate you. It's no longer a command, it's an echo that fades. And here comes the deepest revelation. Real relief isn't in soothing the pain, but in understanding it. When you understand what your pain is trying to teach you, it stops hurting in the same way. You see it, you recognize it, you accept it. And then the unthinkable happens. You no longer seek to escape, you seek to understand. You no longer repeat the cycle. You watch it from the outside, with respect and compassion. You realize it was always you trying to come home, only taking the wrong paths. And with that understanding comes something unexpected. Tenderness. Not a weak tenderness, but a fierce one. The kind that lets you look at yourself with love even when you fail. The kind that forgives without excusing. The kind that holds you when your mind still trembles. That tenderness is the antidote to repetition. Because no one transforms through punishment, only through care. And this is where everything comes together. Guilt disappears, fear dissolves, control stops being a battle. You discover that freedom doesn't come when you defeat your habits, but when you understand them. That real strength isn't in resisting temptation, but in no longer needing to run. And then, without realizing it, the behavior that once ruled you fades away. It has no one left to protect, no void left to fill. Only silence remains. But this time, it doesn't scare you. This time, it's home. And then comes the moment you never expect, the one where you realize you're no longer trying to heal because, for the first time, you don't feel broken. You catch yourself in the middle of an ordinary day, breathing without fear, without needing to escape, without repeating old rituals. The emptiness that once devoured you is now just space. Space to feel, to create, to exist without anesthesia. There are no fireworks, no movie-like epiphany, just a new calm, so silent it's uncomfortable at first, until you understand that what you're feeling is called freedom. And that freedom is curious because it doesn't arrive as a conquest but as a return, not as an achievement, but as a remembrance. You realize that peace was never a reward. It was your natural state before you learned to fear. Before you associated pain with weakness, before you confused love with rescue. Freedom isn't conquered, it's remembered. And all it ever took was to look at yourself without running away. And now that we've made it this far, before we continue, I want to present the following to you. Our book, The Formula of Awakening, is now available. Do you feel like there's something inside you that wants to awaken, but you don't know where to start? Then I invite you to transform your way of thinking, and with it, your way of living. Discover who you can become. Start today. The link to get the ebook is in the first pinned comment of this video. Grab your copy now at a great price. With that said, let's continue with the video. Everything they promised you you'd find outside, calm, safety, control, was waiting inside, just behind your resistance. And in that final moment, you understand the most important thing. It was never you against you. It was you trying to return to you. It always was. Your mistakes, your impulses, your falls, they were all messages disguised as missteps. Your soul trying to get your attention in the only language it knew. Repetition. And now that you understand it, everything makes sense. The cycle ends, not because you defeated it, but because you no longer need it. If you've made it this far, if something inside you resonated with these words, don't ignore it. It means a part of you is ready to end the war, to stop punishing yourself and start accompanying yourself, to come home. And if that resonates with you, stay. Subscribe, because here you won't find prefabricated answers, only truths that hurt, but free. This space is for those brave enough to look within. And I want you to write one sentence in the comments. Just one, but from deep within. I'm coming back to myself. Write it without overthinking, as a pact with yourself. Not with me, with you. Because the simple act of writing it is a gesture of return, a way of telling yourself that you're still here, that you can still begin again. And before you go, I want to make something clear. This isn't the end of the video. It's the beginning of the rest. What you do after hearing it will determine whether you go back to the cycle or start your own story. Don't close this video as if it were just another one. Stay with the silence it leaves, with the echo that lingers, because that echo is you. See you in the next one. Or maybe not. Maybe you'll just find yourself, and that will already be enough.